For the better part of a century, the world ran on a script written by one dominant power. From the end of World War II, the United States set the rules, policed the seas, and fueled the global economy. It was the era of Pax Americana, the American peace, an order built on alliances, shared values, and the undeniable might of the U.S. military and its dollar. But what happens when that era comes to a screeching halt? We're living through a moment of fundamental change in global power, one that will reshape the lives of everyone on this planet. The return of an America First philosophy hasn't just signaled one nation's change of heart, it's kickstarted a scramble for what comes next. This isn't just about one country's changing role, it's about the massive realignments happening in its wake. The old map is out of date. It's time to draw a new one. The resurgence of an America First agenda in Washington, D.C., cemented by the 2024 presidential election, wasn't just another political event. It was a geopolitical earthquake. It confirmed what has been building for years. The era of unquestioned American global leadership is changing. The United States, which once saw itself as the indispensable nation, is now openly asking if its global commitments are worth the cost. Public opinion is deeply divided, with only a narrow majority still supporting an active role in the world. This isn't your grandfather's isolationism. It's a deep-seated reassessment of America's place in the world, one that puts domestic needs first and turns decades-old alliances into transactional, what's-in-it-for-me calculations. But this American pivot isn't creating a simple vacuum of chaos. Instead, as U.S. leadership becomes more selective, a power vacuum is being filled by new competing blocs. The unipolar moment is over. A multipolar scramble for influence has begun. We're witnessing the birth of a new global architecture, defined by three emergent forces: a more independent and strategically autonomous Europe, a formidable China-led bloc expanding its influence, and a complex web of Middle Eastern powers charting their own course. The age of a single global policeman is over. The era of rival neighborhoods, each with its own rules and ambitions, has begun. Section 1. The Decline of the Old Order. The foundation of the old order was the American alliance system, a global network of security guarantees and economic partnerships. Today, that foundation is cracking. The America First doctrine isn't just talk, it's a policy of deliberate recalibration. Nowhere is this shift more obvious than across the Atlantic. The U.S.-Europe alliance, once the bedrock of global stability, is facing an existential crisis. The current administration has signaled a new approach to the partnership, one that puts far more emphasis on Europe taking responsibility for its own security. At the heart of this is a deep skepticism toward NATO. The alliance is increasingly viewed not as a sacred pact, but as a transactional arrangement where American protection is conditioned on financial contributions. There's open talk of a division of labor, where the U.S. pivots its primary focus to countering China and Asia, effectively telling Europe to handle its own continental defense. This strategic shift is paired with the very real threat of broad tariffs on European goods, which could spark a transatlantic trade war, cripple economies, and weaken any unified response to regional threats. This attitude reflects a change in the American psyche. A powerful political force in the U.S. now argues that resources spent on foreign aid and alliances, like the support for Ukraine, would be better spent at home. The U.S. is no longer as willing to be the primary financier and guarantor of an order from which many feel it gets too little in return. This withdrawal of enthusiasm is the single biggest crack in the old world order, and new powers are rising to fill it. Section 2. The Rise of New Power Centers. As America looks inward, other nations aren't just sitting around. They're actively building a new global landscape, forging alliances and institutions that serve their own interests. This is the new reality, a world of distinct, powerful, and competing blocs. First, Europe. Faced with an American security guarantee that now comes with conditions, the continent is being forced to ask a question it has long avoided. Can it stand on its own? The idea of European strategic autonomy is no longer just a talking point in Brussels, it's an urgent necessity. This means developing the ability to act without the US, both militarily and politically. While leaders are preparing to make concessions to avoid damaging trade wars, they are also trying to build up a domestic defense industry and better integrate their armed forces. The goal is a Europe that can defend itself. But this is a monumental task. The European defense industry is still fragmented and depends heavily on American tech in key areas. The journey toward true autonomy will be long and messy, but the direction is clear. Europe is slowly becoming its own pole of power. Second, and most significant, is the rise of the China-led bloc. While the US is consumed by its own debates, China is playing the long game. Its strategy is methodical, using its economic power to build a new sphere of influence. Washington's focus on competing with Beijing creates opportunities for China elsewhere. As the US pulls back diplomatically, especially in the global south, China steps in. Through massive initiatives like the Belt and Road, China is financing infrastructure across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. It offers loans and technology with no strings attached about democracy or human rights, which many developing nations find appealing. But this isn't a one-way street. The narrative of simple dependency is evolving, as some countries push back and renegotiate debt terms, suggesting a more complex relationship is forming. China isn't just building roads, it's building a coalition, positioning itself as a champion for nations that feel left behind by the Western-dominated order. Third, the Middle East is in the middle of its own radical realignment. Here, the old rules are gone. The U.S. is expected to maintain its core commitments, like support for Israel's security, but these relationships are becoming purely transactional. The focus has shifted from democracy and human rights to a narrow set of American security and economic interests. As a result, regional powers are hedging their bets. They're strengthening ties with China and Russia and making security decisions based on their own survival and prosperity, not on loyalty to Washington. The region is no longer a collection of American client states. It's a dynamic and volatile arena where global and regional powers compete for influence. Finally, there is the global South itself, a diverse group of nations in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia that are refusing to be pawns in a new great power game. The U.S. pivot has accelerated a trend of multi-alignment. These countries aren't choosing between the U.S. and China. Instead, they are building their own networks, working with China on infrastructure, Europe on trade, and the U.S. on security, whenever it suits their interests. Section 3, the Scramble for Influence. This new multipolar world is not a peaceful one. The breakdown of the old order has kicked off a dangerous scramble for influence that will define the coming decades. The most obvious battlefield is economic. The era of free trade is being replaced by an era of economic warfare. The U.S. has used the threat of tariffs not just on rivals like China, but on its own allies in Europe, wielding economic leverage as a political tool. The situation remains fluid, with some sweeping tariffs having been imposed in early 2025, only for some to be suspended or renegotiated amid instability. The rivalry with China is a prime example of this new reality. A fight waged with industrial policies, export controls on critical tech like AI chips, and a relentless push to de-risk supply chains. The second front is military. In Europe, pressure on NATO has created a security dilemma. As the U.S. pivots resources to Asia, it leaves a potential vacuum in Europe that could embolden adversaries. European nations are being forced to increase defense spending, but it's a slow and expensive process. There's a tricky balance at play. While there's a push for a stronger European defense industry, U.S. arms sales to Europe remain high, boosted by the war in Ukraine and the continent's immediate security needs. The third front is diplomatic. A global battle for hearts and minds is underway, with the global south as the main stage. China, Russia, and the United States are all competing for influence, each offering a different deal. China offers economic development without political meddling. Russia offers security assistance. The U.S. offers a model based on democracy, but its transactional approach has weakened its appeal. This is a competition for access to strategic resources, diplomatic coalitions, and the power to shape the rules of the new global order. Conclusion: the new reality. The world that emerged after the Cold War, a unipolar world led by a confident, globally engaged United States, is gone. It's been replaced by a messier, more complex, and far less predictable reality. This new world order is multipolar, with at least three major centers of power: an America First United States, a rising China-led bloc, and an increasingly independent Europe. Orbiting these giants is a dynamic global south, unwilling to be tied to any single power. This new order is transactional. Alliances are no longer based on shared values alone, but on cold, hard calculations of national interest. And this new order is competitive. The conflict is not just military, but economic, technological, and ideological. A constant, low-grade struggle fought in boardrooms, through trade deals, and in the diplomatic halls of developing nations. We've moved from a world with one set of rules to a world with several competing rulebooks. Power is more diffuse, alliances are more fluid, and the future is far more uncertain. Call to action. The tectonic plates of global power are shifting, and the consequences will affect us all. In this new era of competing giants and transactional alliances, will the world become more stable or less? And which of these emerging blocks will ultimately define the 21st century? The answers are being written right now. What do you think? Which nation or bloc is best positioned to lead in this new era? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Next, we'll be exploring the technological arms race between the US and China, and be sure to check out our previous video on the future of NATO. Thanks for watching.